listener production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Welcome to The Briefing. If you're one of the millions of Aussies planning to head overseas at the moment, all the chaos in the Middle East might have you wondering if it's safer to just pull the plug.
The most important thing for people to do right now is not to cancel. If you cancel, you will lose a guaranteed cash refund and you're going to be in accordance to your terms and conditions of how you purchased.
That deep dive into what you need to know before you fly and how to avoid losing thousands of dollars is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Wednesday, the 25th of June.
Hey Chris, and to you listening, we're starting today with Donald Trump, who's delivered a scathing warning to Israel, telling its military not to drop further bombs on Iran in his attempt to maintain a ceasefire between the Middle Eastern countries. Trump announced the deal on Truth Socials yesterday, claiming to have successfully stopped the war, but it lasted just a few short hours.
They violated it, but Israel violated it too. Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either.
It came after both sides accused the other of breaching the deal before both Israel and Iran launched missiles into the other's territory, killing civilians.
As he left the White House to attend the NATO summit Tuesday morning local time, Trump told media he was disappointed in the outcome.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.
Since the strikes, both the Iranian president and Israeli prime minister have agreed to again respect the ceasefire, provided they both remain committed to it. Trump says he's also received a message from the NATO chief congratulating him on taking decisive action in Iran, labelling it extraordinary and something no one else dared to do.
Yeah, now speaking of NATO, Donald Trump has actually since arrived in the Netherlands for the NATO summit, where he'll meet with world leaders, including Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, on the sidelines. And that's because Zelensky says there is no signs that Russia's leader Vladimir Putin plans to end the war with Ukraine, with Russia having stepped up its strikes in recent weeks.
Yeah, and he's calling for the NATO leaders to support Ukraine's defence in the conflict, with the Kremlin already condemning those plans. So all these world leaders have descended in Netherlands at the moment, and they're all being asked to bump up their defence spending and allocation towards conflict in Europe, which at the moment is dominated by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And just briefly, while we are talking about conflicts overseas, some good news for Australians and their family members who've been stranded by the ongoing war in the Middle East. More than 100 of them are now on their way home, with Australia's diplomats and the ADF helping them leave Tel Aviv late Tuesday night.
Australia's plan to improve its failing mental health system is in need of major reform and isn't fit for purpose, according to a new report. The Productivity Commission has been looking into the National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Agreement and has labelled it inadequate, ill-informed, out of reach and alienating. The plan is backed by all levels of government and aims to improve mental health, reduce suicide and self-harm, and boost life expectancy for Australians with mental health conditions.
But an interim report's concluded that it is fundamentally flawed, making broad and lofty ambitions with unclear plans for how to achieve the goals, and had made no tangible difference since the agreement was first penned 3 years ago. It also showed mental health and suicide rates in Australia haven't improved in that period either. So the Commission suggested the government create an entirely new plan, this time with help from stakeholders working in the industry, with an insight into the issues it's facing to take effect after 2027. And they want youth mental health, workforce and psychosocial issues to be a priority.
Yeah, as it should. And look, this is a pretty concerning result at a time when Australia's in the midst of a national mental health crisis. We've got people within the sector that have been coming out and even spoken to us as whistleblowers every day, calling out the system and the gaps that are failing patients. And what they're saying is it's leading to serious harm and even deaths of people. And that's things like, lacking hospital beds, staff shortages, and, there's poor systems and red tape. And they've even had hundreds of people threaten to walk off the job because of how overwhelmed, underfunded and under-resourced it is. So here's this plan that the government promised would address these issues, and then the review of it finds it's hopeless as well. Like, no wonder people don't have any confidence that this is going to be addressed and that it's being taken seriously.
61% of young Australians believe the country is racist compared to 41% of the general community, a new report has found. Australia's only national survey tracking progress on reconciliation shows the majority of those respondents form that view based on the fallout from the failed voice to Parliament. The same national survey found First Nations people are experiencing racism at a rate 40% higher than a decade ago, with younger Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders most affected. Examples include verbal abuse, social media attacks, service refusals, and physical violence.
Yeah, and Reconciliation Australia says that these were experienced at the hands of police, taxi and rideshare services, hospitality and utility providers, as well as employers. And its CEO, Karen Mundine, says that the increase was disheartening, but also unsurprising following the failure of the referendum. But still, she says it's promising that 60% of young people and 56% of multicultural Australians want to support reconciliation, which she credits to better education on Australian history. And she's now backing calls for institutional reform and a national anti-racism framework.
Yeah, and it's interesting that she mentioned education there as kind of this turning point, because I can speak anecdotally to this. I don't know about you, Tara, but in primary school it was all about Captain Cook. Australia was discovered. This idea that, we effectively dispossessed people of their land was never discussed, and that nuance and that discussion didn't take place. And when it did take place in high school, it was very, very surface level. We didn't really dig into it. I think now that the tides are changing. I know now in school there's a lot more work being done in this space, but it seems like there's still quite a long way to go.
Journalist and host of the Weekend Briefing, Antoinette will return to the federal court today for the verdict in her 18-month unfair dismissal case against the ABC. Antoinette was taken off air 3 days into a 5-day Christmas cover on ABC Radio Sydney back in 2023 after reposting a Human Rights Watch post accusing Israel of using starvation as a tool of war in Gaza. She argues her removal was due to her race and political opinion, claims the ABC denies.
This case was never just about me. It was about protecting the principles that should matter to all of us. I will always stand up for myself. I will always stand up for civil liberties. I will always stand up for human rights. I will always stand up for justice. I will always stand up for journalism without fear or favour.
The 7-day trial in February included testimony from Antoinette, as well as former ABC Chair Ida Buttrose and ex-Managing Director David Anderson. The court heard claims the public broadcaster was pressured by a pro-Israeli group and that Antoinette's line manager felt internal pressure from above to remove her from day one. The ABC maintains it was not influenced by such campaigns, that her employment wasn't terminated as she was paid for the full 5 days, and that she was taken off air after failing to comply with a direction to not post, quote, controversial material to social media.
Yeah, and Antoinette is seeking between $100,000 and $150,000 in non-economic losses for pain and suffering, and the decision will be live streamed on the Federal Court's YouTube account from 10:15 this morning, Australian Eastern Standard Time.
And we've got the big banana, the big crab, and the big pineapple. And soon, ladies and gentlemen, we could have the big pear. Ooh. That's if a group of Victorian business leaders get what they want. The group's pushing for a 3-story high giant pear to be built in Victoria's Goulburn Valley, which is known as the Food Bowl of Australia.
Yes, and now plans for the big pear to be built in Shepparton are already underway. It'd cost a whopping $1.3 million, but inside the fruit, it would also tell the stories of the fruit-growing region's rich history. And it's where we get the delightful SPC canned fruits from that everyone would have eaten at some point in their life, even if it was in their childhood.
Oh, I love it. Look, homage to the things that sit on our Woolies and Coles shelves. It's beautiful, really.
Yeah, and look, I did a very brief stint in Shepparton back in the day and working there. Let's just say the town is in need of a tourist attraction, so I say give it to them. But if you're wondering why the big pear, Chris, obviously you're waiting on the edge of your seat to know. Well, 90% of the country's pears actually come from the Goulburn Valley, so it's only fitting that if they got any big thing, it was a big pear.
Oh, I love this. It kind of reminds me of when the local council in my area put a tender out for what statue we would like to build, and what we landed on was a bronze Bruce Lee. So,
I mean, I kind of like that a bit better. When I worked up in North Queensland, the Sunshine Coast, they've got the bow and mango and also the big pineapple. And I never used to get it, but honestly, once I lived up there, they become genuine tourist attractions. Like everybody stops at them for a photo. They have a sticky beak. They might buy some products. So I can definitely see the appeal. I reckon give them the big pair.
Yes, and who are we to yuck their yum? That brings our headlines to a close for today. Next up is my deep dive, looking into whether now is a good time to fly, what you should do, what your rights are, and should you take out travel insurance. I know people might be pestering you, but it could be a good idea. Stick around, that deep dive's coming up for you next. We're just weeks out from the busiest time in the Aussie travel calendar, but with tensions flaring in the Middle East, hundreds of cancelled flights and thousands more rerouted, plenty of would-be holidaymakers are wondering, will I actually get there?
West Coast 4943, as I understand it, they've just closed the airspace, so just in the last 5 minutes.
Qatar's foreign minister now has just announced it is shutting down its airspace to all commercial flights.
That will impact hundreds, if not thousands of Australians.
While airspace across the Middle East reopened yesterday and Donald Trump announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, the last fortnight's been unpredictable to say the least. And with July, the most popular month for Aussie travellers, with more than 1.5 million of us departing the country, plus those planning overseas travel later in the year, where does all this uncertainty leave us and what can we do to actually protect ourselves? Joining me now to help us make sense of it all is the CEO of the Australian Travel Industry Association, Dean Long. Dean, welcome to the briefing. I'm flying to Europe via Abu Dhabi next month. Should I be cancelling my flights?
No, look, the most important thing for people to do right now is not to cancel. If you cancel, you will lose a guaranteed cash refund and you're going to be in accordance to your terms and conditions of how you purchased. So if you are a bit anxious, there's some things that you can do. Make sure you're checking the Smart Traveller website, making sure you're talking to a really good travel advisor or a travel agent if you use one of those. But really be mindful at the moment that we're in a massive disruption. They're going to be prioritising people that have been impacted or are being impacted now and over the next 72 hours. And so just making sure you're aware of that. If your flight is cancelled, the airline has to give you a cash refund, and that's what you want to focus on in that instance. And we learnt that during COVID. Those people that didn't cancel and had their flights cancelled got their money back quicker.
Travel insurance is, the flavour of the week. Everyone's talking about travel insurance, taking out travel insurance. If you don't have it, take it out. Do you support those kind of calls and suggestions?
Oh, 100%. Look, if you can't afford travel insurance, you can't afford to travel. Let's be really, really clear about what that is. And we know when we're a bit younger, we're invincible and nothing matters and nothing's going to go wrong until it does. And you realise that you can't afford a house when you get back, even more so than when you left. So it is absolutely essential that you have it. Is it going to support you in a war zone? No. Travel insurance isn't going to support you if you go to high-risk areas, Iraq, Iran, Ukraine, etc. There's going to be exclusions to that. But if you have an accident and you need to get home and you don't want to rely on family, friends or a GoFundMe page, it's the best way to get home. And for several $100s, that's going to give you the peace of mind you need if something goes wrong.
If someone's flight is cancelled or rerouted because of a conflict, whether it's in the Middle East or Russia, Ukraine, a lot is bubbling away in the world at the moment. What rights do we have as consumers when it comes to those flight cancellations and reroutings?
Yeah, look, if an airline cancels your flight, you will absolutely be entitled to a cash refund from the airline if that's what you elect to do. But that's probably not going to help you on the onward journey if you've got hotels and other things that you've got booked. So most people who've had their flights cancelled will still want to travel. They'll still want to head up and go to Europe and have a great time over there. And the airlines will do their best to facilitate that. One of the issues that we've got at the moment is that usually if there's cancellations in the Middle East, we can get you to Europe through Asia. That capacity at the moment is very, very full. So there's limited availability on seats there. So people will have to be bunched up over the next 3 days. The flights are already full. They're going to be extra full. So unfortunately, you probably won't have a free seat next to you on flights for the next few days to Europe. But they will get you there if you want to get there. If it is a cancellation, that's where travel insurance can help. If you've had to cancel part of it because something is out of your control, if you've got a comprehensive policy, and unfortunately that usually means not relying relying on your credit card for that insurance policy. It's one you're going to purchase through a travel agent or direct with the insurance company. You'll be looked after in those instances, but just check out the terms and conditions and be aware at the moment, lots of phone calls are going to be happening, so wait times on call centres are going to be up today.
What can we expect to see when it comes to the price tags attached to our flights at the moment if this conflict continues or escalates in the Middle East? Are we to be bracing for more expensive flights and flying?
There's two costs that drive airlines at the moment. One of them is staffing costs, staffing in fleet, and the other one is fuel. So in the last 24 hours, we've had a record spike in oil prices, and in the last hour and a half, we've had a record drop in oil prices. So airlines hedge, so they'll have a bit of a standardised approach to that, which effectively means they've taken a bet on the futures and to come up with a price that they can manage. We don't expect there to see a major fluctuation in prices between now and the end of the year. We're going into a peak European and peak North American summer. That's usually when people are travelling to those destinations. So we expect if there is a drop in demand and there's an increase in cost, they'll pretty much measure out. So the price that you're going to pay for an airfare won't move around that much. The number one rule for anybody, though, is, look, the days of getting last-minute airfares are probably gone. The best thing is book as early as you can into those sales period, and that'll get you the lowest cost. It may not give you the highest value ticket in terms of what you can change, but it will give you the cheapest ticket.
All right, well, I'll take us out of that doom and gloom for a moment, and let's just imagine in a month's time I have made it to Europe safe and sound. I've touched down in a country, yet that country has been swept by anti-tourism protests and actions and behaviour. Is this something that's on your radar, and what can you tell Aussies that are going to be travelling to some of these hotspots like Spain, Italy and Portugal?
Yeah, look, they are definitely the hotspots, and there's probably a few things that you need to be aware of when you're going to Europe. So 60% of all European nights that are recorded do so in 4 countries. 32% of those nights happen between July and August. So what we have in Europe at the moment is a huge concentration of people travelling to the hotspots in Europe. And there are protests going on in some of those areas. So I think as a traveller, what you need to be looking at is if there are some of those marquee items that you want to see, go and see them, get the photo taken, do those aspects. Be aware of that when you're going to a hot spot. I mean, there's lots of visitors and lots of tourists. It is having an impact at the moment in Europe, and they're not liking it because people are struggling to afford a home or struggling to afford rents when they're working in the hospitality and tourism space. So visit them quickly and then get out and disperse and go to slightly off-track places where typically value for money is going to be much better and your experience far more authentic.
Another area of concern at the moment when it comes to Aussies travelling abroad is the US. There's a lot of chatter around run-ins with border security. Again, is this on your radar, and what advice do you have?
Yeah, we are seeing some people being stopped at the border, but I must admit from all accounts that what we're hearing is that level of inspection for Australians that are departing Australia going directly to the US hasn't changed drastically from there. The reporting of it and certain instances of people that have taken a public stance that may not align to the wants or needs of the government have experienced some more parts. But the really important thing is there's no new legislation. There's no new regulation that the Americans have brought in since there's been a change of president. These items have always been in place. What they are doing now is doing some different screening of that. If you are looking to transit through the border, and this is the advice our ATIA accredited agents and tour operators are giving people, is have your itinerary printed out, have your hotels booked. Make sure when you go and you're talking to the customs official that you've got everything in place so they can see what you're doing and you can answer those questions as honestly as you can and as transparent as you can. And that way you'll have a really as smooth experience as you can through LAX. Don't worry, the lines are still as long as they've ever been and there'll be lots of touch points. But the reality is just have that there, be prepared, and then you really won't have any problems and you'll have a really good time in the US. There's some amazing experiences to be had there.
Well, that level of planning is a level of planning I could never subscribe to, so I will be sticking with Europe this year, if that's okay, Dean. I do want to ask you, do you guys expect to see a boom in domestic travel like we did post-COVID and during COVID to some extent? Is there any indication of Australians wanting to stay on home soil this year, given everything that's unfolding globally at the moment?
Look, it's not something we're seeing a change in consumer patterns. What we typically find with an open border is that people want to go overseas. overseas, we've got pretty much most families in Australia with a parent who's born overseas. So while it might be a holiday experience, there's other factors that drive that. There was 12.5 million international trips taken by Aussies last year who left the country. So nearly half the population went overseas. What we find is people will just pick different destinations. I mean, last year you pretty much found half of Australia in Japan. This year you're finding them in Vietnam and in other places as well. So look, I think some of the headwinds and challenges facing the Australian tourism industry is relating to price point and experience. The shortage of skilled workers to deliver on a very high price point holiday will continue to be a real drag on the tourism industry in Australia. And when you can have some of the amazing experiences, 1.5 million people went to Bali last year alone, that will continue to happen and people will still travel. That's one of the great things that we've got. We love travelling. Travelling internationally is what we do. It's part of our mental health program. It's part of what we do. It's part of our growth as a country. So we don't expect that to slow down in any way. Just the destinations people choose to will change.
What is driving the costs of airfares at the moment? Because there was a lot of hope and expectation that post-COVID, with the travel boom, we would see prices go down. That hasn't really happened. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so what we're finding is that there are some really good deals in the economy section of the planes at the moment, and we are finding that there still is a shortage of planes out there. So all the airlines can't get all the planes they want up in the air. So that's meaning there's a bit of a throttle back on capacity. But most airlines that are flying to Australia now have got back to pre-pandemic capacity. That's good, but the cost base has increased. So we're not going to see those super cheap airfares that we saw sort of leading into COVID, where things were very cheap and probably more so, but there are some really good deals. Booking early and having a trusted agent or advisor with you, and it probably feels a bit counterintuitive to people that haven't used an agent before, but they've got access to deals and programs that can give you really attractive pricing and bundle things up to get that best price. So look, head to atia.travel and find a good advisor that can help you and support you on that journey and give you the expertise you need. I think we've seen in the last 24 hours how important those advisors are.
Great. We love a cheeky plug at the end of an episode. Dean Long, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks, Chris. Cheers, mate.
That was CEO of the Australian Travel Industry Association, Dean Long, speaking with me there. And if you've been impacted by any of this, whether your flights have changed route or whether you've actually gone out and cancelled your flights, get in touch with us in the comment section of this episode or reach out via DM at The Briefing Podcast on Instagram. That is it for this episode of The Briefing. We'll be back in your feeds tomorrow morning, but before then, we've got our afternoon edition with Natasha Belling for you. I'm Chris Spyrou. I'll catch you next time.
Listener.